found it was interesting actually, because there were certain cases where I think building on the conversation we had last time, there's a little bit more precision now of understanding what you are recruiting for, and equally as a BA, what you're likely to land for. And what I would say is, you could have been going in there with my background, which was more of a traditional BA with a digital slant, if you would, and then you would realise that halfway through the interview, you know what, they just want a requirements gatherer. And that may be great for somebody to think, right, I'm going to earn 40, 45k just to do that. But a lot of BAs, as overthinkers as they are, if you're not getting stimulated in that thinking zone, it will just push you to, you know, not to destruction, but it will push you to certainly to beyond distraction. So I think certainly when I was looking, it was a case of what's the story that's being told here? What's the problem that they are trying to solve? And what are you looking for the BA to be involved in? And equally as well, are you going to be brought in as a big cog in a small wheel or a small cog in a big wheel? And how does that land? And how does that land with yourself as a personality type? You may just want to work on individual problems within a larger organisation. And I worked, for example, with Littlewoods Shop Direct, worked on the merger there, and worked for JD Williams, Brown Group, big organisations. With there, the exam question that you're brought in for was, can you look at logistics, can you look at customer reclaims, or whatever it would be. But you still have some clarity, and that was a really attractive thing, and they made really enjoyable interviews and great jobs that followed. And I think where sometimes it was the case that sometimes recruiting managers or the organisation, they didn't really know what the problem was that they were trying to solve, but just we need a BA. Now, if that's the situation as a BA who's looking for that fulfilment of what's the problem you want to solve, that could be incredibly frustrating. And I think in that situation, if that discovery came in an interview, even if you're offered a job, you may then choose to decline the job, because actually, individually, it's just not going to be stimulating. There's some people may say that's arrogant, you should be grateful of a job. But as per the previous conversations, a lot of BAs have pretty high IQ and EQ. That emotional intelligence, it can often be, you know, lead to some vulnerabilities, I guess, if you're not being stimulated. You know, it can, the devil finds work for idle hands and an idle mind. As I moved from home shopping, where we had the Lean Six Sigma background, and went to JD Williams, which was for the Lean bit. So there was a part of the journey that I wanted to move from beyond Six Sigma into Lean, into digital products, and then wanted to, as was the case when we moved to hard housing, to go from to take learnings that I'd taken from Lean manufacture into social housing to drive up efficiencies there. And those roles were just old school. It was in the newspaper, in the Manchester Evening News. So it was as old school as that. But then, I mean, you're going back to sort of 2004 through to sort of 2006. So at that stage, 2008 even. So at that stage, the role as a BA wasn't necessarily there. Those first roles were as a process improvement coordinator. So the BA wasn't really a thing then. It was sort of in its emergence, if you will. Then there was a quality analyst. Again, if you looked at the role descriptions there, so that's a pure BA role, but there was a quality analyst, and then there was a process analyst from social housing. And looking at roles later on, then you moved into the territory of total jobs, Indeed, and those places. Actually, so I tell a lie, Brown Group, that was from total jobs, now I come to think about it. But it was very much in a more of a traditional way. Now, evolving from that, there was quite a lot of internal promotions to partner role, if you will. And then later roles, LinkedIn, just trying to think then, LinkedIn. One was a recommendation, so one was an invite to have a chat, which then led to an interview. So that was one, that was based from somebody who'd worked with me before, a couple of months, and thought it'd be worth having a chat. That wasn't that it was a penalty kick in any shape or form, but just what would the role be? And I think that was useful because they were defining slightly what would the role be as well. And then a role after that then was from LinkedIn, and then from there on I've had my own business as a director. So it's been an emergence really. It's gone more from the analog to the digital. Having also used recruiting managers in my final employed role, a lot of people like yourselves, then you then see the value of, because the BA role has evolved to such a piece, it's it's finding the plane. But yeah,
Yeah.
analog to digital, I guess. Yeah, so I think before the interview, when you've had the invite for the interview, or even when you're looking at the role, as an analyst, what does your analysis tell you about the organisation, and what are your assumptions of what will be the interview format? So assume there will be a competency-based interview. Assume it may be testing you on one of many elements of business analysis. It might be something more on the digital side. It might be something about how you would work in that more scrum environment, if it's in that piece, or it may be, as in the case with many I've been on, where it's what's the problem that you would solve, what were the tools you would have. So you might be ending up expecting to be drawing box plots to show variation analysis. It might be process analysis. It might be root cause analysis. It might be in some cases where you think I may need to deploy an Ishikawa, the fishbone, which is, you know, the who, the what, and so on, or 5 why analysis. So just have a guess or a decent assumption of this is the role that I'm going for. This is what the advert has told me, and this is how I think the format is likely to be. Because as an analyst, that should be something you'd be doing if you got the job. You shouldn't be going into any meetings. It may appear you're going into meetings blind, but actually your subconscious and your conscious have been prepping you for there. So I think there's a preparation piece, and there's a preparation of assuming who's going to be in there, what the format is, and therefore making sure you're on top of your game of your various tools and your techniques. Having that should be a given. I think crucially as well, one of the do's and don'ts is to ensure you have manners. Ideally, that's a natural thing, but these things are important because many recruiting managers may be looking to consider, well, what's your bedside manner and how would you be if you're out there? Because you're not likely to be micromanaged as a BA. You're going to be given quite a lot of trust out in the business or out in the organisation. So if you are a potential grievance machine, that's not necessarily going to land well. So I do think there's manners and consideration to your interpersonal skills, and consideration and seeking feedback if you have anything that could be perceived as microaggressions or otherwise. So, for example, you can't tell from here, but I'm 6 foot odd, I'm a big lad. So therefore, if I move my hands like that, which attempts a lot, some people are, whoa, that could be perceived as aggressive. So I wouldn't say I'll sit on my hands in an interview, but I would be mindful or at least draw attention to, you know, if I get sort of articulated passion, but rein it in. So I think demonstrating some awareness of yourself, but also an awareness of if you needed to adjust, I think just gives off that message. From there, I think you should be expecting, I think it's the case for anybody, for any interview, whatever role it is you go for, you should be asking questions, and they should not just be thoughts of questions in the car park before the interview. They should be relevant to the business, they should be relevant to how they're working, and there should be probably some brave questions in there too. If you're not prepared to ask a brave question in the interview, or if you do ask a brave question, they're not necessarily happy to respond to that. Is that sort of organisation you want to work in, when as a BA you are wanting to get them to solve problems and to get to a point of improvement, unless you know you want a job? And I think there's a difference between wanting a job and wanting the right role or to solve that. So do your homework with regards to understanding what's the company vision. Understand from the company vision if there's been clarification on the company mission or the organisational mission, what the strategy is, and the key business objectives. It's amazing how much information can be discerned from the website. It can also be amazing how much can be given by checking on Companies House. So the organisation that you're going for, and you're doing a quick check on Companies House, who are the current directors? Have they had any issues? Have they had any gazette notices or any other elements with regards to, I mean, that's useful as well. You don't want to go for a job for a role where they're, you know, they're about to be served and they're about to be wound up. That can happen too. As an analyst, you should be doing that 360-degree review, including looking on Glassdoor and asking around, looking on LinkedIn, who is in the community, what are people saying, and just have your eyes open. People may be saying challenging things, but actually that's part of the journey that they're on. They want to face them and to improve. Your eyes are open from there. And also with regards to some organisations, for example, they may have recently received funding, they may have received investments, or they may be on a growth platform, or they may be within a particular geographic region. For example, if they're around Warrington, they might have dotted lines to SciTech. So there's various different elements. So it may be, for example, if you're in manufacturing, that the links into Industry 4.0, made smarter. And those approaches, so you're thinking, who are they the suppliers of services to, or who are suppliers of the services to them? So many business analysts have a tool called SciPoc, where you look at the suppliers, the inputs, the process, the outputs, the customers. So again, you'd expect you would do, even if it's an assumptive SciPoc on the organisation, you'd be making an assumption and then you'd say, well, what can I do? So even if you had 10 minutes and the interview was dropped on you, this is stuff that you would expect to have an idea of what's the likely business architecture, what's the likely structure of possible systems. Again, if they're manufacturing, they might have an MRP system. If they're in sort of wholesale or others, they might have enterprise ERP systems or otherwise, or they're in social housing, it will be that they have housing management systems or others. You know, how are they capacity planning? How are they looking at productivity? What KPIs do they have? Again, if you want sort of a stock question, would be how do they currently measure performance from those areas? Again, as a BA, if the organisation is not comfortable providing some of this information, or just waiting to gather requirements, that's fine if that's what you want to do. But if you want to be stimulated, and a lot of BAs do want to be stimulated, and when we've seen BAs who've gone for roles where they've not been stimulated, it can often, I wouldn't say assist depression, but it can certainly get people into a sort of a challenging place, if you will. And as I'm talking to you, I've just had a text from somebody who I've worked with who had previously been in that situation. So I think, and I'm guilty of this, is just launch into asking a few questions before you've done some listening, because we're naturally wired with the 5 why analysis. Why do you do it? And it's passion, but as I said, just remember, particularly in an interview, 2 ears and 1 mouth, there's a reason for that. And even if it's difficult for us, you know, but equally to counter that is just to make sure you've got your pen and pad, your digital analog or otherwise, as much as so you can capture them thoughts. And remember, it's a meeting about a role and about whether you're fit for that role too. I think also just regarding is to consider the body language that you have got and look at the dynamics in the session. And again, I'm going to go back to the manners thing. If you don't display manners, some people may not be bothered about that. I just think that it is important that if you're going into that session, wait to be asked to be sat down, you know, and just have some politeness about that. There's an element of arrogance. Also, even in an interview, if he's talking about you, just consider how often you're being self-referential, me, myself, and I. As a BA, as a collaborator, sometimes it's useful to look in the world in terms of we rather than the me. And again, going back to that non-verbal communication, holding. I've had one person who was great, but held a stare for far too long. I thought, what has that got to do? But going back to that previous comment about a grievance machine, you could just think, say, this is going to end up. Not expected to. And also is if you do make assumptions about how the organisation may be, is let them, you know, if you use that concept, this is just my assumptions, but I may be wrong. I guess there's a phrase, I don't know if you ever come across a book called The 48 Laws of Power at all. It's a great book. It's not a business analysis book, it's just a book for stuff in life. The first chapter is don't outshine your master. So even if you're passionate and I think, oh yeah, you can do it, is just remember that, you know, don't outshine your master, particularly in the interview as well. So I think building on what you said, which I think is right with regards to, you've got your core headlines, if you will. You've got the profile of what type of BA are you, you know. So in my case, it always said accountant to auditor to analyst, being counter to being checker to being grower. So it gives you a flavour and a little bit about your personality, so remember who you are as a person. So just, you know, so there's no surprises to them. That passion and trying to bring a bit of colour to a bit of colour to a black and white world. Sort of, there's that little bit of a strap line with regards to from there, and then some key headlines with regards to, it may be recent key projects that you've worked on. It may be that you've recently had an MBA, you've had a qualification, or whatever you've had that's on there. So a combination of achievements and qualifications, just a couple of headlines on there. Then key sort of events in a little bit more detail. So it may be that you'd worked on a project, let's say in home shopping, for looking at part delivered parcels, and you've done a review. So it was a review of supply chain, review of logistics, on this that was brought in savings, projected savings of £500,000 by changing the course. So the what, the saving, the efficiency, and what was there. It may be that you worked on, rather than on an improvement project, on a design project. So some of them key elements which are there. So that's sort of your more current stuff. Equally, some good stuff in your back catalogue too. And also, this is I think that there's a lot of sort of people would totally disagree with me, and that's absolutely great. I would, and then to have the list of what you've done since you left school, even when you were during at school, include the coffee shop bit. And it's some people say, why on earth do I need to know about that? For me, that's gold dust. How better an example of understanding, you understand customer service, you know what it feels like. You've seen an angry man, you've seen an angry woman, you then know what that's like. And it's like the Mike Tyson thing, everyone's got a plan till they're punched in the face. If you've been punched in the face, get it written on there, because actually that's an amazing life skill. Going back to the bedside manner, these are important things. Some people totally disagree with that, that's fine, they can recruit however they want. I want to know who that person is, and some of the best BAs I've recruited is because of that part-time job they had in that leisure centre, and they had a challenging issue. One of the other best BAs I had was, what's the problem that you had to solve that involved different teams? Said person had been in the territorial army, absolutely nothing to do whatsoever as a business analyst, but they were in the theatre of sort of the pretended theatre of war, and they had to bring in sort of helicopters and all sorts of stuff. That's project management in the go, but that's analysis of what requirement. That's requirements analysis and solutions provided there and then. That's wonderful. That actually meant more to me as a BA recruiter than, you know, if you'd done Janet and John process mapping. We got to the process mapping piece as well.
Yeah.
So it's the person, and then equally, if you've got written in there just a little bit of the story of you. Now that doesn't appear very commonly in BA CVs. However, in, for example, digital creatives, very often their CV will be equivalent by, it might be a YouTube clip or a TED talk or something along those lines. So it's like you can see that, or present it to yourself in that way. But what's the story of you? Because if you're wanting them to understand user stories, epics, or customer journeys, and that is a story in itself, and it is understanding, for example, the customer journeys, the emotional impact, how did you feel? So if they can't demonstrate, they articulate that themselves in a CV, then you want to be asking, that's part of the question, what's the story of this person, and what are they weaving in